The York and Lancaster Regiment was a line infantry regiment of the British Army that existed from 1881 until 1968. The regiment was formed by the amalgamation of the 65th Regiment of Foot and the 84th Regiment of Foot. The regiment saw service in many small conflicts in both World War I and World War II until 1968, when the regiment chose to be disbanded rather than amalgamated with another regiment, one of only two infantry regiments to do so, with the other being the Cameronians. History. The regiment was formed on 1 July 1881 through the amalgamation of two regiments of foot and a militia regiment, 65th Regiment, 84th Regiment, 3rd West York Light Infantry Militia, under the original scheme of amalgamation announced in March 1881. The title of the new regiment was to be the Helmshire Regiment. This reflected the fact that the regimental district included an area of West Riding of Yorkshire known as Helmshire. The proposed title was unpopular with the amalgamating units, who sought a more suitable title, which at the same time would identify the regiment with the county, which the word Helmshire entirely fails to do. 4 different titles were proposed, and following a vote of the officers of all 4 battalions, the title York and Lancaster Regiment was chosen. The regiment inherited the title York and Lancaster for the 84th Foot, to which had been awarded in 1809. The 84th was one of the few regiments of foot lacking a county designation, and the title was given in recognition of the fact that the unit had been raised in York in 1793, with a 2nd Battalion in Preston, Lancashire in 1808. The new regiment saw service in both Egypt and Sudan immediately after its formation, and also during the Second Boer War, when it took part in the relief of Ladysmith. The 1st Battalion of the new regiment had spent 11 years in India 1871 to 1882. They were moved to Aden to be held in reserve for the Egyptian campaign. After 18 months, they shipped on the Serapis to Trinkitar, Sudan, arriving the 28th of February 1884. The next day they came under gunfire and made a bayonet charge, capturing 2 Krupp guns. Later that day 7 were killed and 35 wounded at the Battle of Elteb. The 1st Battalion was reported 421 strong when at Suakim, the 14th of March, before losing 32 killed and 25 wounded. They embarked on troop ship HMS Jumna the 29th of March, arriving Dover the 22nd of April 1884. First World War. The regiment raised 22 battalions for service in the Great War. The 22 battalions consisted of the 2 regular battalions, the Depot Battalion, 6 Territorial Army battalions, 9 service, 2 reserve, 1 transport and 1 Labour battalion. 17 of the 22 battalions saw service overseas. During the Battle of the Somme, the Yorks and Lancaster battalions that went over the top on the first day, suffering huge casualties. 11 battalions of the regiment fought during the Somme offensive. Regular Army. The regular 1st Battalion returned from service in British India to be formed up as part of the 83rd Brigade in the 28th Division. The 28th Division consisted of regular battalions returning from overseas service and was shipped to France in January 1915. The 1st Battalion saw action in the Second Battle of Ypres and the Battle of Loos. The battalion was then shipped to the Balkans as part of the British Salonika Army, where it would remain until the end of the war. While the battalion was still in France, Private Samuel Harvey won the York and Lancs' first Victoria Cross since the regiment's creation in 1881. The 2nd Battalion was stationed in Ireland with the 16th Brigade Brigade when war broke out. The battalion arrived on the Western Front in September 1914 with the 6th Division as part of the original British Expeditionary Force. The 2nd Battalion fought its first battle at Radingham south of Armentières during the Race to the Sea. The 2nd Battalion fought in most of the major battles of the war, including the Battle of the Somme, and spent the entire war serving in France and Flanders. Private John Caffrey, 2nd Battalion, won the Victoria Cross in 1915. Following the armistice, troops from the York and Lancaster Regiment were involved in a mutinous riot at the Clipstone Camp, Nottinghamshire, following disquiet at the slow rate of being demobilised. Territorial force. The 1/4th Battalion and the 1/5th Battalion landed at Boulogne-sur-Mer as part of the 3rd West Riding Brigade in the West Riding Division in April 1915 for service on the Western Front. The 2/4th Battalion and the 2/5th Battalion landed at Le Havre as part of the 187th Brigade in 62nd Division in January 1917, also for service on the Western Front. New armies. The 6th Battalion landed at Suvla Bay in Gallipoli as part of the 32nd Brigade in the 11th Division. The battalion was evacuated in December 1915 and moved to Egypt before moving on to France in July 1916 for service on the Western Front. The 7th Battalion landed at Boulogne-sur-Mer as Pioneer Battalion for the 17th Division in July 1915, also for service on the Western Front. The 8th and 9th Battalions landed at Boulogne-sur-Mer as part of the 70th Brigade in the 23rd Division in August 1915, also for service on the Western Front, and then moved to Italy in November 1917. The 10th Battalion landed at Boulogne-sur-Mer as part of the 63rd Brigade in the 21st Division in September 1915, also for service on the Western Front. The 3 PALS battalions, the 12th Battalion and the 13th and 14th Barnsley Battalions, landed in France as part of the 94th Brigade in the 31st Division in March 1916 for service on the Western Front. They suffered particularly heavily during the Battle of the Somme. Second World War. The 1st Battalion was carried to and from Norway by HMS Sheffield. This led to a bond of friendship between the regiment and the ship, and meant that when the Sheffield was adopted by its namesake city, the York and Lancashire was awarded the Freedom of Sheffield soon after. This battalion served in the 15th Infantry Brigade, part of the 5th Infantry Division, and after being shipped around most of the British Empire was finally sent to the Mediterranean, where they fought in Sicily. They then fought in the Italian campaign, where they fought through that campaign from 1943 to 1945 until being transferred to Belgium in February 1945 to join the British Second Army in the invasion of Germany. The 2nd Battalion was involved in the defense of Heraklion during the Battle of Crete in 1941. Most of the casualties in this battle were suffered in the withdrawal by the Royal Navy, which came under heavy air attack from the German Luftwaffe. On returning to Egypt, they became part of the 70th Infantry Division used in the breakout from Tobruk, where they suffered heavy casualties as one of the lead battalions. In 1942, they were transferred, along with the rest of the 70th Infantry Division, to India and Burma, where they took part in the Second Chindit Campaign and the Arakan Offensive toward the end of the war. The Hallamshire Battalion were part of Morris Force in Norway in April 1940. The battalion was part of the 146th Infantry Brigade attached to the 49th Infantry Division. The Hallamshires took part in the unsuccessful Namsos campaign and were evacuated back to Britain by the 5th of May. The Hallamshies did not see active service until it was landed in Normandy soon after D-Day and fought its way through France, Belgium, and into the Netherlands, where they were part of the bitter fighting that led to the eventual capture of Arnhem in 1945. The former 5th Battalion, which had converted to anti-aircraft artillery in 1936 as the 67th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment, Royal Artillery, served in the North African Campaign in 1941 before being transferred to India and then Burma, where they were prominent at Imphal, and later at Mandalay. From October 1944 to January 1945, the regiment served as infantry due to the shortage of manpower in the British Army at the time. The 6th Battalion was a second-line territorial duplicate of the 4th Battalion formed in 1939 when the Territorial Army was doubled in size. The battalion was attached to the 138th Infantry Brigade and went to France in 1940 with the 46th Infantry Division, and experienced heavy fighting in the Saint-Omer-la-Bassée area. In 1942 the 46th Division was part of the British First Army in the Tunisia campaign, and from 1943 until the end of the war they fought with the British 8th Army in Italy, from Salerno to Rimini. Meanwhile, the 7th Battalion, which was raised in 1940, was in India, but served mainly on the northwest frontier, before being moved to Burma in 1945, too late to contribute to the defeat of the Japanese. The 8th and 9th Battalions, both raised in 1940, after being stationed in Northern Ireland with the 71st Brigade from 1940 to 1942, were both sent to India in 1942, where they joined the 25th Indian Infantry Division. The 8th Battalion joined the 51st Indian Infantry Brigade and the 9th Battalion the 53rd Indian Infantry Brigade. The two battalions took a significant part in the Arakan battles of 1942–1943 and in the battles for southern Burma in 1944 to 1945. The 10th Battalion was converted to tanks in India, becoming the 150th Regiment, Royal Armoured Corps, in the 254th Indian Tank Brigade. The 150th Regiment used Lee tanks with which it fought at the battles of Imphal, Kohima and Mikatila, and on the advance to Rangoon. Post-Second World War. Following the Second World War, the regiment saw service around the world, including participation in the Suez Crisis of 1956. With the reorganization of the Army in 1968, the York and Lancaster Regiment was one of two infantry regiments that chose to be disbanded rather than amalgamated with another regiment, the other regiment being the Cameronians. However, although the 1st Battalion was disbanded in 1968, with the regimental HQ closing in 1987, the traditions of the regiment were continued through the descendants of the Hallamshire Battalion, which was constituted as two companies in the Yorkshire Volunteers. On the 6th of June 2006, the platoon took its rightful place in the ORB-80 of the newly formed 4th Battalion, the Yorkshire Regiment, thus ensuring a continued and direct link, via the Territorial Army, with the York and Lancaster Regiment. Recognition of this link was further reinforced by a recent decision by the Yorkshire Regiment Association to recognise all former members of the York and Lancaster Regiment be members of the YRA. Battle Honours. The regiment's battle honours were as follows: combined battle honours of 65th Regiment and 84th Regiment 1, plus the Great War, Aisne 1914, Armentières 1914, Ypres 1915, 17, 18, Gravenstaffel Street, Julian, Frezenberg, Bellaward, Hooge 1915, Luz, Somme 1916, 18, Albert 1916, Nicosia, Flers, Corslet, Morville, Thiepval, Le Transloy, Ancre Heights, Ancre 1916, Arras 1917, 18, Scarpa 1917, 18, Arluz, Oppy, Messine 1917, 18, Longymark 1917, Menon Road, Polygon Wood, Broodsind, Poel Capel, Passchendaele, Cambrai 1917, 18, Street. The Second World War, Norway 1940, Odin, Fontenay le Pesnil, Con, Le Vie Crossing, Le Touquet Crossing, Forêt de Breton, Le Havre, Antwerp, Turnhout Canal, Shell, Le Mars, Arnhem 1945, Northwest Europe 1940, 44-45, Tobruk 1941, Tobruk Sortie 1941, Minder Sejanani, Djebel Cornine, North Africa 1941-43, landing in Sicily, Simeto Bridgehead, Pursuit to Messina, Sicily 1943, Salerno, Vitry Pass, capture of Naples, Cava di Terani, Volturno Crossing, Monte Camino, Calabrito, Colcedro, Garigliano Crossing, Minturno, Monte Tugo, Anzio, advance to Tiber, Gothic Line, Coriano, San Clemente, Germano Ridge, Carpenter, Lamon Crossing, defensive Lamon Bridgehead, Rimini Line, San Marino, Italy 1943-45, Crete, Heraklion, Middle East 1941. North Arakan, Mongdor, Rangoon Road, Tungu, Arakan Beaches, Chindits 1944, Burma 1943-45. 1. The Honour India of the 84th Rec was modified to India 1796 to 1819 in 1912 to differentiate it from the India Tiger Badge of the 65th Rec. 2. Awarded 1909 for services of 65th Regiment Victoria Cross Awards. Private Samuel Harvey, 1st Battalion. Private John Caffrey, 2nd Battalion. Sergeant Frederick Charles Riggs, 6th Battalion. Sergeant John Brunton Dakins, 2, 4th Battalion. Corporal John William Harper, Helmshire Battalion. Affiliations: Les Fusiliers Mont Royal Miners 1968. The Wellington Regiment 1964. 7th Battalion, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment 1964-1968.